Today we're grading the most played black cards in the entire Commander format.
I'm Mia, and I just built a Roxanne deck.
I'm Beezy. I've explored way too much of the 90 Day Fiancé cinematic universe, and we're the Nitpicking Nerds, sponsored by Card Kingdom, the best place to go to buy singles, doubles, triples. I don't know if they have quadruples. You might want to check, but if you want to check, use the link in our description because that lets Card Kingdom know that we sent them and that we're awesome because we think that they're awesome.
We have a homepage, so if you want to know what we think about certain cards and whether you should buy them, check that out. The link will be right below, and that will tell you that we sent you. We're also sponsored by Dragon Shield, best sleeves in the multiverse.
Good sleeves.
If you use the code
NERDS
at checkout, you can save 5% of your Real My Attack stars on your entire order, including the 25th anniversary art sleeves that are super shiny, super dual matte, and amazing, and I love them.
I just sleeved up a deck with them. They're great. And we're sponsored by Moxfield. But slow your roll. We're sponsored by Moxfield later at a random time that is unguessable. Trust me. And we have Patreon if you want to support us directly and see more Nitpicking Nerds content that is not on YouTube, not available anywhere else. That is the place for that. And Nitpicking Nerds from the future here to tell you about Showcase deck boxes. These are a really great way to have a sturdy, cool presentation for your commander. I have a nice altered Carador in here. Mia's got the Kalia rocking, and you can head over to their website actually to check them out.
So check the link in the description, and you could buy one today.
So today's a fun one. We are going to be looking at the top 30 most played black cards according to EDH Rec. That's the best resource to determine who's playing what in Commander, and we're going to grade them. We're going to give them a grade, a letter grade, A through F. I will do a quick breakdown of what those actually mean, but just know that we're going to talk about what we think of the card, you know, and then at the end give a grade as like a cherry on top, as an easy, like, quick way to remember how we think about it. But of course, the important part is the meat in the middle, the things we actually say about it. But A's are auto includes. They're some of the best cards to fill its given role, whether that be ramp, removal, sack outlet, whatever. They're often irreplaceable, or they're the very best synergy pieces available to you. B's are powerful cards that require a little bit of work to shine, and they are including staples and build-arounds in that category. C's are replaceable and serviceable, but not essential. They can also include build-arounds that require a lot of setup, but still have some payoff. And D's, we think, are about pretty mediocre. They're outclassed by other options. They are playable. There's a lot of things that can do whatever they do better, or they're really heavy build-arounds that require like a Herculean amount of work, which they still have a payoff, but good luck getting there. And F's. These are cards we'd recommend avoiding almost all the time, or they're just nonsense that only works under hyper-specific scenarios. You know, think some jank enchantment from 2004 that gets played in exactly one commander deck. That's an F, but those players with that one deck know that it's not. I just want to reiterate, though, every one of these grades still potentially playable. They all have possible homes, but this is how we're going to be grading these. And we're going to be going in reverse order. So Mia, hit us with that number 30.
The number 30 most played black card on EDH Rec is Entomb. This is black for an instant. You search your library for a card, you put that card into your graveyard, then you shuffle. This is an amazing card. It is very efficient. You could do it at instant speed, and it just enables your best pieces to be put in the graveyard.
This is a very special Magic card because most tutors go to hand, but there's a pretty big subset of cards and strategies that would actually rather put cards into the graveyard. This doesn't even say creature. It just says search for a card. If you have any card with flashback that you can just cast right away, you get that added layer of like flexibility to it. The main thing you're going to see Entomb for is go find some 7, 8, 9, 10 drop, throw it into my graveyard for 1 mana, and now all I have to do is go through the trouble of reanimating it, playing some I'm sure we'll see some later on this list, some spell that costs very few mana that will get that creature back into play. And if you were to for example, use some other tutor like a Grim tutor, you get that big creature in your hand, but you don't want it there. Entomb has so much utility.
It's so nice too because it doesn't have any of the restriction of like Unmarked Grave, which has non-legendary creature into your graveyard. This is so unconditional. I play this in my CEDH deck because I am trying to enable combos from the graveyard, and this is the most unconditional way to put something there. Do you play it anything?
I have it in CEDH as well. I'm putting Protein Hulk in there, and then I'm trying to like Necromancy it, have it die, and then win the game right there on the spot. This is an A for us because while it is not a literal auto-include, our definition of A allows for the very best, the pinnacle of certain types of cards. There is not really any replacing Entomb. It is far and away the best card in Magic at what it does. So happy to give it an A as just a fantastic reanimator graveyard card.
It's just so efficient. The instant speed, the non-conditional part of it, it's such a good card overall. I think it has to be an A. But moving on to 29, this is Infernal Grasp. 1 in a black for an instant. Destroy target creature, you lose 2 life. This is short, this is sweet, this is easy. However, I do think it is outclassed by a lot of other cards, whether that be hitting multiple creatures at once or being able to reduce that with like Convoke or something like that. Or even with things, if you want to go like to a higher point, there are other ones that will just let you cast it for free or exile things in black. That I just think that this is not the greatest removal spell especially in black.
Yeah, if you just look at like Magic overall, this is pretty good because it's a definite upgrade over Doomblade, Go for the Throat, Cut Down,
Murder,
Fatal Push, Murder, Hero's Downfall. Like all these cards is definitely an upgrade of. But when I look at the absolute best black removal that I'm happy to play, like you said, it's all free. Snuff Out, Deadly Rollick, Lethal Scheme, all of these other things. I can tack on 1 more mana for Soul Shatter and get a 3-for-1. Flare of Malice is often free. So like, this is I would say it's a good Magic card that I really struggle putting in decks, and I really don't end up putting it in decks. So I feel like for me, that means it's probably about like a C-, where like totally playable card. You can put it and be happy with it, but I feel like the alternatives are better in a lot of cases.
I think it's just so outclassed by so many other things. Even if we're talking at the most budgety, less than $1 cards, you're looking at things that have been reprinted into multiple precons. We're like talking about Lethal Scheme at this point and Pile-On, which can be reduced. And I just like really would prefer having that reduction over just having a flat rate and just not having a ton of flexibility there.
Yeah, so definitely C-, totally fine card, but not a card we end up playing very often. It also doesn't synergize with anything, and a lot of the other cards we mentioned have other bonuses if you're in like certain decks. So number 28, we have Pitiless Plunderer, 3 and a black for a 1/4. Whenever another creature you control dies, create a treasure token. This thing has no safety valve on it to stop it from being messed up. So, you know, my token's dying, cool. Same creature dying more than once, great. I'll just get all these treasures and then turn the treasures into other things. And this thing has combos with Gravecrawler, Nether Trader, other friends, I'm sure other multiple card combos. It ends up being, if you have like a sack outlet, it's basically a Phyrexian Altar, but better.
I mean, this is just a combo piece. I have this in my No Rares Mahadi deck because so many things are dying there. I want treasures, you know, out the butt. But I think that in decks like those, you put this in, you accidentally have like an infinite combo at a certain point. That's just how powerful this card is. Even if you have it accidentally in, you know, your Pirates Matter decks, you can still have an accidental combo in there to kill the entire table.
Yeah, once you throw a sack outlet and some way to generate useless bodies onto the field, Pitiless Plunder quickly turns into just I win the game. This is fantastic. I feel like if you want creatures to die, this is one of the best when creatures die, do X cards in the format. So I got to give it an A-. I think that's where we stand on it. As far as this type of payoff, it's one of the best ones you can get.
Plus, it says it's just another creature. It doesn't say non-token or something. And that's usually what a lot of the other death payoffs are limiting you with because it says non-token. But this is just so unconditional that it's what makes it such a good card. The next one is another card that I play in Mahadi because it is so good with tokens. It's Mirkwood Bats at number 27. 3 and a black for a 2/3 with flying. Whenever you create or sacrifice a token, each opponent loses 1 life. I play this in multiple places. I love this card. I play it in Edgar because I'm just basically, you know, getting tokens because I breathe. I'm playing it in Mahadi. I feel like I might play it in like one other place. I can't remember at this point, but it's such a versatile card. Our editor also loves this card.
Yeah, I'm really surprised that Mirkwood Bats is the 27th most played black card in the format. Again, that is how we're grading these. It's not a ranking that we're making. This is just the most played cards from number 30 to number 1. So, I mean, it makes sense because it's a really accessible card budget-wise, and I think it's just got a pretty big effect because you can set it down and then you never have to pay any extra mana into it. So it's just a great way to go, here's this, whether I'm developing and getting my feet under me early and then paying it off later, or whether I've already done all the work, play it late game, I still get all the benefits. So I think Mirkwood Bats is a really good payoff. I don't think it's one of like the, you know, top level 1% payoffs for sacrificing tokens because it is also like a more specific card than like Pitiless Plunder. Because if I'm sacrificing tokens or non-tokens for Pitiless Plunder, I still get my stuff. This is like, you got to make sure you have tokens and lots of them, and you have to be able to sacrifice those tokens, so treasures or like goblins plus a sack outlet.
Yes, but because this is just I'm not gonna. Yeah, it's you definitely have to build around it a little bit, but it's such a good card overall, and it's so accessible. I don't know if everyone would agree with me, but I think that this is the best new common to be printed in the last couple years. This is just very powerful and very accessible.
Where do we have it?
We have it at B. I think that this is a card that is great in a lot of homes, but as BZ mentioned, it's not an auto include.
Yeah, it's kind of like on the level of a Pitiless Plunder, but in way less decks. Once you're in that deck, like, you're super happy. Because I know you have it in a couple decks. I actually don't have it in a deck, just because I haven't built one out of the 17 that I have that specifically wants to sacrifice all of those tokens and stuff. So next up, kind of a surprising one, also very high. Number 26, Read the Bones. 2 to black sorcery. Scry 2, then draw 2, and you lose 2 life. 3 mana draw 2s. They are fine in the sense that at least you're playing a card to go up a card. They're card advantage. They're not so much mana that you're in a tempo black hole, but I haven't played Read the Bones ever in a commander deck since it came out in Theros. And it's not getting more playable. Let's put it that way.
I think of this as like a nostalgic card, right? I have it in my Fun Kalia deck, but I think of it as a precon card. This is one of the cards where you're like, this is fine when you first get your precon and you're swapping out all the other stuff, and it kind of gets like forgotten in there because it's completely fine. It's not bad. It's not great. It's probably not synergistic to what you want to be doing. But if you need a little bit of card draw and you're on a budget, I understand.
That's a good way to put it. I think if you open a precon out of the box and you want to change 10 cards in and out, Read the Bones is not a card you touch. You take out the garbage or the cards that are supporting a commander that you don't want to play from that precon. You take out that stuff and you the really bad stuff. But Read the Bones is one of those cards that'll stay in if you only make 10 or 15 changes. But once you actually care about percentage points, I feel like there's just so many other cards. I mean, we're going to get to some other 2 mana draw 2s on this list that you probably know about, but even just Dire Sight. That card just came out. I don't know if it's that great either, but it's a strictly better Read the Bones. So Read the Bones is in dire straits, but definitely not unplayable. I feel like we have it at D+. I don't know where else to put it, honestly. That's I think, pretty firm for us.
Yeah, perfectly fine if you're playing it because you didn't want to upgrade to anything else. I don't see us putting it in many decks, but completely understandable if you are playing it in another deck.
Yeah, you know what? I think it's a good comparison is Explosive Vegetation. Explosive Vegetation is an okay rate, but there are 25 better Explosive Vegetations, some of which have synergy, that you just never end up playing it. So it's like a playable card that you shouldn't play if you can upgrade it, which is kind of very easy at this point. Next up, number 25, Damnation. 2 black for sorcery. Destroy all creatures. They can't be regenerated. I have interesting thoughts about Damnation. I haven't really seen this card in a while, to be honest.
I haven't either. I feel like this is a card where you ask yourself, am I playing like anything that is, am I playing mono black? And if the answer is yes, you might want to put this in as your board wipe. But if you're playing white, if you're playing red, you're probably not going to Damnation for board wipes because you have so many better options in those colors. And as better like commanders come out with more colors and give you a lot more like toolboxy options, even though this is like a card that still holds a lot of value like money wise, I still think it's been outclassed by a lot of the board wipes that we've seen recently, especially when board wipes in other colors can cost 1 or 2, like Vanquish the Horde or Blasphemous Act and stuff like that.
Yeah, this is like a situational board wipe, I think, because if you're in mono black or like maybe black green, I'm trying to think of like board wipes, or maybe black blue where you don't have a ton of good ones. If you're touching red and white, I feel like you don't need this card as much, but between, various one-sided board wipes depending on synergy versus like Farewell, Vanquish the Horde, and you said Blasphemous Act. So a lot of black decks don't ever even care that Damnation exists, but then, maybe like 25% of them are happy to play it as like their second best black board wipe because there is one that is way better. So Damnation, I think, sits at a C+. It is a totally serviceable card, but it's not going to knock your socks off. It's a 4 mana board wipe.
I mean, it makes me wonder what people think of Damnation compared to like Final Act. Is that the new one where it's like destroy a bunch of stuff?
The reverse farewell.
Yeah. So even though that's a little bit more mana, it does hit a lot more options and it's very modal. So it makes me wonder if people are liking that as much as Damnation, and if Damnation is only up there because of the fact that it was one of the better board wipes back, in the times, and people just haven't updated their lists.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of other factors too. Like if you're zombies, you probably don't want to play it. You might play Necromancer's Hex, I think, or what it's called. Or if you're vampires, you're probably playing Olivia's Wrath. Or if you're enchantments, you're probably playing Extinguish All Hope. There's so many one-sided ones. If you're any Kindred deck, you're probably playing Kindred Dominance. So like, there's just so many places where Damnation just is like forgettable. But I think 4 mana for a War Rift it can only be so bad. If you could just put that in your deck and it'll be totally fine, which I think is C+ incarnate. How about number 24?
Number 24 is an MDFC, and we love to talk about those. It's Malakir Rebirth. Black for an instant, choose target creature, you lose 2 life. Until end of turn, that creature gains. When this creature dies, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. On the back is a tapped black land.
Good old Malakir Meyer.
This is... I like the modality of this card. That's why we love MDFCs, because they are lands and spells, as you've heard us say 10 billion times. But overall, I'm trying to think of when I'm really using this. When I play this card, which I'm not sure if I have it in any decks at the moment, it is usually a land, and there is a 10% chance that I'm using it on its spell side. However, with its spell side, I do really like the fact that it's very cheap, it's an instant, and it's not like there are some MDFCs that seem out of reach. Emiria's Call.
Sometimes Shatterskull Smashing.
Yeah, those seem just too Turn Timber Symbiosis at times. It just seems out of your reach because they're these gigantic 7-mana sorceries, and you're like, do I really want this? But this is obtainable. If your commander is going to die, you can save it with just a single black mana keeping it up. And I think because of that cheapness and because of its flexibility, I'd put it in like not bad, but also because it comes in tapped, and that's like completely worse than the new uncommon ones in MH3 that have come out. I'd say this is also not cream of the crop.
Yeah, the thing about MDFCs is they're not going to get A+ or even Bs based on power alone. It's also based on how easy this card is to include in your deck. What is the opportunity cost to play Malakir Rebirth? Almost nothing. You can cut a tap land for it or cut a swamp for it, and pretty much nothing's going to change. And you can also cut a spell for it to now have an extra spell / land, so you flood less. I feel like we've said this before. Anyway, Malakir Rebirth is a good MDFC because I think this type of card is bad by itself, and I don't really like playing it. But when you throw me a land and make it completely free to include, then the 10% of the time when I'm really happy to do it, either proactively with a sack outlet to re-trigger ETBs, or reactively to save it from spot removal, or survive a board wipe with the only creature intact, that's when this card is good. And getting the free roll choice to put in a deck means I think we're at B-, because it's so easy to play. It goes in a lot of decks, and it's never going to be dead.
I'm never playing Fake Your Own Death unless I'm very much trying to trigger my commander over and over, but I will slot Malakir... Rebirth. There, I almost said Malakir Blood Witch. Malakir Rebirth into a lot more decks than I will be playing just a, save target creature, basically.
Yeah, next up, number 23, Dauthi Voidwalker. Black, 3/2. It's got Shadow. If a card would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead with a Void counter on it. And you can tap and sacrifice Dauthi to cast a spell exiled with a Void counter on it for free. You do it to lose the Dauthi, but like, oh my god, this card doesn't need to be a 3/2. It doesn't need Shadow. It could literally just be that middle text, and it would be my arch nemesis forever. This is a card that is so unbelievably disruptive that you could easily throw it into any black deck, and it will be fantastic.
Who would win, one Dauthi Voidwalker or every deck that BZ has ever made?
The Dauthi.
That is true. But Dauthi is an amazing card. It's also really great because Dauthi's cards that are exiled under with void counters are not literally exiled under it. If you sack the Dauthi and bring it back somehow, you can still sack it again and play something else with the void counters on it. And if they're void counters from other people too, so long as they're not yours, you can play that. This comes down so quickly. It's so disruptive. It chips in for damage if you really wanted to, but just being able to play other people's stuff, whether stealing lands, having counter magic up because you have this Dauthi, it's incredibly powerful, and it can slot into literally any deck.
And there's no cards like it. There's not really a backup, for what if I don't want to play Dauthi? It's like, well, then you just don't get this ridiculous hate bear / value piece / like weird pseudo color pie break that lets you steal someone else's counter spell in a super critical moment. Dauthi Voidwalker A+. We're talking like top 0.1% of commander cards. It is so backbreaking. It is so powerful. And even if it dies, you're probably up on the exchange because this is a 2-mana card that you just set down on turn 2 and forgot about.
It's one of those cards where you need a reason to not play it, basically. Whether that's, I don't want to include it because of budget reasons, or it's too powerful. It's just one of those cards that's so good, and you can put it in any deck that can run it. Next up at 22, it's Sir Conrad the Grim. 3 black for a 5/4. Whenever another creature dies, or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, he deals 1 damage to each opponent. And if you pay 1 in a black, each player mills a card. I played this in a couple places. I really like Sir Conrad. I think he's a very cool guy. And
he's great to hang out with.
Yeah, and not just because he is a cool top end for the aristocratic / sacrifice type strategies, but also because he does enable mill strategies to have some sort of a win con.
Yeah, he fills a couple roles. Definitely a specific card, way more specific than a Dauthi Voidwalker or a Damnation. He wants to be in a deck where plenty of creatures are dying, or plenty of creatures are leaving your graveyard, or plenty of creatures are being milled. He does have combos if you want to throw in like a Mind Crank. Activating him will most likely fuel the next activation, and then you're probably off to the races in a pseudo-infinite, non-deterministic infinite. But it's still, like, this 5-drop, uncommon, is packing quite the punch, and I think he also serves a really good role in budget decks. There's a lot of payoffs, like too many to list, for when your creatures die, get some positive effect for yourself that you would love to activate a million times. This is in the top 10 or so, I feel like.
I mean, you know how good it feels to be playing a Breach the Multiverse with this out, and you're like, oh, I guess you guys can all take 15 because we all milled 10 and I hit 15 creatures.
Oh my god.
It feels so good being able to profit off that, and then after like a board wipe or something, it's a lot of value because it hits so many of those like bases, right?
Yeah, the thing that he has against him is he's a little expensive. 5 mana for what is essentially an aristocrat effect. A lot of times this is comparable to like a Zulapur Cutthroat, so sometimes you're upset and you don't really get your 5 mana's worth. I think he still is one of the better aristocrat sort of payoffs for killing things, so I feel like he's about sitting at a B- for us. Pretty happy to have him, but I could easily see you build a deck. Maybe the best Aristocrats deck doesn't have Sir Conrad.
He enables more strategies if you want to do something like filling the graveyards, but he is not the best Aristocrat payoff, which does make sense why we'd put him at the B-. Never 21. 21. It's Diabolic Intent. 1 in a black for a sorcery. As the additional cost to cast it, you sacrifice a creature. Search your library for a card, put it into your hand, then shuffle. It's Demonic Tutor with extra steps.
Yes. Are you a deck that can sacrifice a creature? If so, you have a Demonic Tutor. And I will say, obviously Demonic Tutor is going to be on this list later, but sometimes this card is better than Demonic Tutor. I have this in CDH, and a lot of times what can be useful is, interestingly enough, since you're already playing it as a tutor, that's great. That's what we're mainly playing it for. But sometimes the sacrifice a creature is an added gotcha spell, right? So like if I have a creature with a dies trigger, and my opponents are going to be keen on exiling it, if I put Diabolic Intent on the stack, the creature is sacrificed unrespondable to. That's how I'm paying the cost. So as soon as I do that and announce it, my creature's dead and the dice trigger's on the stack, and you've missed your chance. That's just one of the cool, tricky things you could do. This card can be better than Demonic Tutor, can be better than that card. Has a definite downside over that card, but is still obscene.
I love this too because if you're playing more stacks-based things, you can put your stacks piece out if it's a creature, let it all go, and then it's like, okay, with the stacks piece, I'll sacrifice the stacks piece to make sure that I get all the benefit and you guys had to be weighed down for all of your turns. I think that it's very nice because it doesn't say sacrifice a non-token creature like all of the flayers do and that such. So it is easier to do because if you have like an Orcish Bowmasters, for instance, and you just want to sacrifice the token to get Demonic Tutor, that's very easy to do.
A Mana Dork. Anything lying around you can throw away to just turn into a Demonic Tutor. So we do have A+ as our highest possible grade, but I think Diabolic Intent with the slight build around. There are decks that I would not recommend you play this card in, where your commander is 6 mana and you're playing 12 creatures in your deck. I would probably say leave it out. So I'm going to give it an A, because it goes in almost everything and pretty much is an auto-include. But some decks are not going to be able to touch it.
It's basically an unconditional tutor, minus the fact that you have to have a creature lying around that you're willing to send to the graveyard.
It's an unconditional tutor with one condition.
Yeah, one condition, but so many other things have so many conditions. It's mostly unconditional.
All right, we're going to go to the next one. It's number 20.
Oh, you hate this one.
I hate seeing it because he's so annoying. It's Great Merchant of Asphodel, 3 black for a 2/4. When he enters, each opponent loses X, where X is your devotion to black, but the annoying part is you gain life equal to the total life lost this way. Even if your devotion is 2, if you just play this by itself, your opponents will each lose 2, but you'll gain 6. And of course, the bigger that number is initially with the devotion, the more frustrating it is and hard to come back from. What I see a lot with Grave Merchant is you can sack it, reanimate it, spam it. This thing goes ham with Razaketh, where you're just sacking the Grave Merchant to go find a way to reanimate it over and over and over, and just getting the triggers. Razaketh also in that particular combo is 3 pips himself. So this card just kills me too much. I'm annoyed by it. It's too good.
This card has burned all of us a lot because, it's a great win con, but I guess BZ the most if you want to go by this. It also goes hard with Saw in half. That just hurts so badly, and the person will just be sitting there with like 40-something life, even if they were at single digits when they first played this.
Yeah, this is not a card that I would really say... this card falls off a little bit as your decks ramps up in power level because you have no need to drain your opponents for 10 when you're probably just playing a combo or something. But everything below, the 9 out of 10 power level, this thing does super work because when it's not lethal, it's not a disaster. Sometimes like a Torment to Hellfire that you have to fire off for 50% of the value is rough because now there's a huge target on your back. But with Grave Merchant, you fire it off for a measly 10. You just gained 30 life. You're probably going to get another turn at this, and that's probably the turn where you trigger Grave Merchant again.
This also goes down in power the more colors your deck has, especially when we're going to 3, 4, and 5. It might be a little bit harder to trigger that devotion, but this is just such a good mono black or black plus another color win con or just value piece, depending on whether you're trying to gain life or just drain your opponents. We're putting it at a B because it is so flexible in these 1 and 2 color decks.
I do have it in one deck right now. It is in my mono black Ashnod deck. It's not even a great home for it. That's a budget deck that cares a lot about artifacts, and honestly, it's still good. It drains for 5 or 6, and I'm pretty happy.
I don't think I have it in any deck, but I respect it, and if I build a mono black deck, it usually would go in.
Next up, I mentioned this previously, it's number 19, Night's Whisper. 1 in a black sorcery. You draw 2 cards, and you lose 2 life. Definitely a card I consider a virtual strict upgrade to Read the Bones. I will not pay 1 mana to scry 2 when I kind of just want my 2-for-1 right now. Quick, easy, get it over with, no investment. I think this is a card that I do recommend playing a lot. It's not a card I actually play, though. I think I tend to lean more personally towards some of the synergy card draw. How do you feel about Night's Whisper? I know you play it more.
I play it more because I feel like in certain strategies that I'm playing, it's harder to find card draw that's a little bit more synergistic because I play in vampires, which, there's a couple card draw vampires like Welcoming Vampire and Champion of Dusk and that sort, but there's not as many just straight up card draw because, it's sometimes hard to find in Mardu. And I also play in Sorin, which is, Orzhov, and I just need that early burst of cards to keep my hand build and also not pay an extreme premium for it. And so I do like it, but I think there are better, especially if you're willing to shell out a little bit more money, or if you just want to pour more mana into it and that sort of thing, or if you have more colors at your disposal.
Yeah, this is a card that I think there's nothing wrong with it. I think it's totally fine. It's just not a card that I have personally slotted into a ton of decks. I did used to have it in a mid-range deck that was literally just a bunch of good cards. There was no synergy to be found in that deck. It was a Mardu deck. I was pretty happy to just pay 2 mana, draw 2 cards, get it over with, and then continue to cast my 2-for-1s and my value engines. Night's Whisper, very fine. I think it's pretty good at C+.
I think it's fine. I think it's serviceable, and that's about where we put a C, right?
Yeah, I want to say the floor and the ceiling of Night's Whisper are like this. There's really only so much that could go wrong, and there's only so much you could ever get out of it. But it is a pretty good card. Number 18, Animate Dead. There sure are a lot of words on this card. It's 1 in a black for an enchant creature card in a graveyard. And when Animate Dead enters, if it's on the battlefield, it loses enchant creature in a graveyard and gains enchant creature put onto the battlefield with Animate Dead. And what it does is return the enchanted creature to the battlefield under its owner's control. And it's got -1/-0 because sure. What it really is a 2 mana enchantment. It works exactly how you think it works. Ignore the block of text. You get the creature back, and if Animate Dead leaves, the creature leaves. And if creature leaves, Animate Dead leaves. 2 mana reanimate, still one of the best rates we can get. And the thing that this has over some other reanimate spells is that it's an enchantment. You can fiddle around with this. You can flicker it. You can return it. It's much easier to work with in black and green and white than a sorcery, which is almost impossible to work with in those colors.
I have this in my CEDH deck, and I've had multiple combos around it. First with World Gorger and flickering that to make sure I get ETB triggers to come and just make sure everyone dies. And now I have it with Abdel Adrian to flicker all of my stuff and get infinite 1/1s. And if there are any other pieces to deal damage to opponents, it's just infinite damage. This, along with Dance of the Dead, are the best rates that you can put onto an enchantment to get this type of effect, and it's very, very powerful.
Only for decks that have big, expensive things to reanimate, so it's a little bit niched, but it's like one of the best things you could be doing in those types of decks, and it's some of the cards. It's also a card that I think, even though it is specific, when you want to pay it off to the maximum, I think you can just kind of play this card in any deck and have it be okay to pretty good, because it actually just targets anything in any graveyard. So if an opponent gets milled, or they have to discard, or they just lost their Atali, got killed by a board wipe, you just get that. That's just an added bonus of this card. I think this card does not get put into any random deck because that's not very interesting from a deck building perspective, but for sure you could kind of just do that. And instead of playing a ridiculously strong card, you've got a very good card. So I think B+ reanimate that. It's about as good as you can ever hope for. I even want to throw in Leonin Relic Warder as another combo piece with this card. That's like 3 cards that just go 1-2 combo. This thing has got a lot of juice.
Animate Dead is sick, and if you don't know the joy of stealing someone's like Eldrazi Titan from their graveyard, you're like, okay, kill it. By the way, I'll take it with Animate Dead. It is the best feeling. You must do it at least once.
All right, number 17, Bolas' Citadel, an artifact, 3 black, black, black. And you may look at the top card of your library at any time. You can play lands and cast spells from the top of your library, but you pay life instead of its mana value. And you can tap and sacrifice 10 non-land permanents to have each opponent lose 10 life. If we're talking value engines, card generation, card advantage, this card is almost unequaled.
This is such a good card. It has combos with Aetherflux Reservoir and top. But even if it doesn't, you play this, and so long as you can get the lands off the top of your library, you can just keep going no matter how much life you have, especially if you have life gain payoffs or you've gained a bunch of life prior, you can just keep going. And then with its tap ability, the fact that you can just sack all your stuff and just finish people off if you've whittled them down to enough life where that is just an option, this does a little bit of everything. This is an amazing card and a great top end.
It cheats mana, it gets you card advantage, and it literally kills people. I really don't know what else you could even put on this card to make it more appealing, because it does every single thing you could possibly want for only 6 mana. Now, the 6 mana is a decent upfront cost, but when you factor in that you're not going to play a land drop for that turn, so you've got at least 1 brick that you can break off the top. So you're going to hit spells. You're going to be putting 5, maybe 10 mana value that first turn you play it onto the field that is now extra threats that they have to deal with. Do they answer the current threats that you just played, or the Citadel that just played them? Because if they answer the threats you just played, then the Citadel just produces more threats. And if they don't, and they answer the Citadel, cool, you got free threats in play that are going to beat them up. Wow, this card is, I think, could go in every single black deck. Pretty much does, and has bonus synergy if you're artifacts, or you can tutor it.
I had this in my Edgar deck at one point, and I took it out because 1, it had no real synergy with it, and 2, every time I played it, I just won. Yeah. It was like easy win button, right? It was just too easy at a certain point. It's just such a good card.
Citadel gets an A-. It is a slam dunk card. You gotta get the mana to cast it, and you got to make sure that you're not getting beat up before that point so you can actually fire off the spells. But in any deck that can do anything at all to offset the top decks, the life, or the having 10 permanents, this card is obscene.
Yeah, I remember I used to just play a bunch of stuff off the top, have a bunch of vampires, and then go, okay, 10 permanents, that's 10 tokens.
Just hold people hostage. Yeah, I play this in multiple decks. It's very, very strong. Next up, number 16, what do we got?
It's Viscera Seer, black for a 1/1. If you sacrifice a creature, you scry 1. This is one of the pieces that goes very well with Bolas' Citadel, because you play something very cheaply. Oh, you have a land on top? We'll just sack the creature you just played, put it to the bottom, and just see what's up next.
I want to see how many cards on this top 30 that Viscera Seer works with, because I was thinking Mirkwood Bats is great if you want to sacrifice creature tokens. Pitiless Plunders, fantastic. Viscera Seer is just a extremely cheap free sack outlet. Cheap both in money and just in mana value, which is what I was actually referring to. Happy to have this in any sacrifice deck. You do have to care about sacrificing creatures. You do need a lot of creatures in your decks, but if we're talking free sack outlets that require 0 mana and can be done repeatedly, I've got Altar of Dementia pretty high, Phyrexian Altar pretty high. This is probably, honestly, the next one. It even does a little bit of deck manipulation with the scry, but I mostly just care that it says 1 mana, 1/1 sack a creature.
I mean, it's so good. It can even sacrifice itself, which some sack outlets can't do sometimes.
Yeah.
And just in response to a board wave, it was like, okay, scry 20? You know, you're still getting that advantage even if you do get wiped with it. And it puts it all to the graveyard. So, you know, if you're worried about some exile stuff, you kind of have that, I'm not going to say get out of jail free, but it does slot it there too.
I'm never upset to have a Viscera Seer. I think it's the best paired with things like Midnight Reaper, Grim Horror specs, where now I can proactively sacrifice creatures to just churn through my library. And I think once you do something like that, get a card advantage engine associated with it in some way, it's not unstoppable, but it's just this engine that will just churn for the rest of the game and get you value no matter what happens for the rest of the game.
Overall, this is a B. This is a great sack outlet. It comes down super early and is a creature, so it plays into itself. This doesn't go into every black deck, but it can go into a lot of them.
And is one of the best versions of a sack outlet to play. Number 15, Sign in Blood. Black sorcery. Target player draws 2 and loses 2. This is, for all intents and purposes, the exact same card and power level as Night's Whisper. Yes, you can target other players to have them lose 2 life or draw 2 cards if that is negative for them. But at the same time, this is harder to cast than Night's Whisper. If you are looking to draw cards early, there are probably turns where you cannot cast Sign in Blood on turn 2, where you could have cast Night's Whisper. I'm going to call that a complete wash and say it's a C+ for the exact same reasons.
I think so too. I prefer Night's Whisper to Sign in Blood because I do like playing multiple colors in my decks, but basically the same card.
Yeah, totally fine. Absolutely solid card. Number 14, Village Rites. Black for an instant as additional cost to cast this spell. Sacrifice a creature, and you draw 2 cards. This is one of the most played black cards. I have a little bit of a gripe against it because I don't think it's very good. I think it is a card that struggles a lot in the early game, which is probably the time where I most need card draw if I'm stumbling. It does require a little bit of something. I think there are definitely decks that Village Rites is good in, but I think they're pretty few and far between. You have one.
I do. I play this in Edgar because you breathe, you get a 1/1, and then you use that 1/1 to sack to actually draw 2 cards. I think it's very good in there. But if you're not just blinking and making creatures, this is way tougher to be playing because just that at that point, that is a creature that you probably paid mana for. And then do you want it dead or do you have the aristocrat triggers and that sort of thing? And if you don't, then at that point, it's just you're kind of like 2-for-1ing yourself.
Yeah, I really am not very high on Village Rites. I think there's a card coming up that's better. I don't think it's unplayable. I think most of the time you won't even notice that Village Rites is a little bit suboptimal because you're going to draw it on turn 8 and you think, oh, it's just free. I have a creature laying around on turn 8. I think it suffers a little bit in the early game, and I also think that it suffers a little bit by just not being a creature. It wants to go in decks with bajillions of creatures, and it's just an instant. So, you know, it's got a one-time effect. There's no, again, the floor and ceiling here. Other than, actually, the floor, I guess, is pretty low if you can't cast it. Most of the time you can. Really not a huge fan of Village Rites. We have talked about it before, so, you know, take an amalgamation of everything I've ever said and add this.
Overall, it will be a D, I think, because it doesn't go in a lot of decks because of the fact that it's not that synergistic to creature decks, but wants to have a lot of creatures to begin with.
Yeah, I think it's just replaceable. Number 13, Black Market Connections. 2 and a black for an enchantment. At the beginning of your first main phase, choose 1 or more. You either make a treasure and lose 1, draw a card and lose 2, or get a 3/2 Shapeshifter with Changeling and lose 3. This is the upgraded, I think, Phyrexian Arena. I think it's a little bit better than that card. I still don't know how to feel about just waiting for my cards. I do like the burst of Night's Whisper, of Sign in Blood. I do like the engine of like a proactive Viscera Seer plus a Midnight Reaper. I just think that waiting is a little bit, you know, it sounds so like Gen Z to say that I want like next day shipping, but I really do.
We like instant gratification, and that's not just because we play Magic in 2024, but overall, I want to like this card. I really do. I want to try putting it in my Sorin deck because that's life gain, and that can be offset even if I pick every single mode. However, I am worried about not getting to the first main phase and spending 3 mana or my turn 3 on nothing. This is a pretty real fear, even if the upside is pretty high of 3 life, getting a treasure token and drawing a card, because I can be using that treasure token later to extort with that deck, and after that point, it's just a wash of life because I will be gaining all that back.
Yeah, I can't call this a bad card. I don't think it's a bad card. I think that it's a little bit slow, I think in the late game, you will draw this, and it really won't contribute much to the game at all. And I think there's a very real risk of playing this in the early to mid turns and having it get swept up in a Nature's Claim or a Druid of Purification, and you don't get anything out of it when you might have been relying and really needing at least one more card to get some velocity. So yeah, it has its problems. Does go into certain decks. I think it does shine more in life gain decks where you can offset that and just choose everything and be pretty happy with it. So I think C- is a good place to settle.
I think the question is, are you killing it with Nature's Claim?
If I'm your opponent and you have one, I mean, maybe.
Well, I mean, like, if there are other threats, like, where does this rank on your threat level? Because I'm trying to figure out, like, where it ranks on mine at this point.
I'm pretty happy to scoop it up because it hasn't done anything yet.
Yeah.
Like, I think I definitely look at it and go, if I can kill that without losing a ton of tempo, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I think that's what makes it a little bit lower for me, because I probably would think the same way unless I knew someone had like a Ristic in their hand or something like that.
Yeah, number 12, we got a Zulaport Cutthroat, 1 and a black for a 1/1. Whenever it or another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 and you gain 1. This is a cheap aristocrat as opposed to Sir Conrad. There's no bells and whistles. You do gain a life, and if for each creature, it pings them. So if you sacrifice 4 creatures, it is a 16-point life swing. They take 12 total, and you gain 4. Is that right?
Yeah, everyone loses 4 and you gain 4, so
Right,
it's
right.
16 overall. But in this, it's like, it's very no bells and whistles, as you said. It comes down very cheaply, so it's a great setup. It's like, if you have just a few early sacks for it, it will swing the game like pretty quickly.
Yeah, the fact that it's cheap is what makes it so playable and so threatening, really, because you can squeeze it in at any point on the curve. And now whenever you're going to be doing your big living death thing or your big token maker plus Viscera Seer, this turns into a fireball at instant speed that you only ever have to shoot at somebody when they threaten you, and it can lead to hostage holding, all sorts of shenanigans that are great for you, the person controlling Zulaport Cutthroat. It is a card that is specific, just like Sir Conrad. You only play this in a deck that's like make tokens, sack tokens, make creatures, kill creatures, that sort of thing. So I think it's a B. It's really good in those decks, and it's not a card that you'll see in like 50% of black decks.
Yeah, it's good at what it does. It does it very efficiently, but it doesn't go in every deck. The next card is number 11, Deadly Rollick, 3 and a black for an instant. If you can control a commander, you can cast it without paying its mana cost. Exile target creature. Simple, sweet, to the point, and as we mentioned earlier, it's free, and it exiles in black.
Most commanders are less than 6 mana, and if you are one of those people and you plan on having your commander out for more than a turn and a half, this is a fantastic card. It was so crazy that this exiles. It could have just said destroy. It could have said destroy a non-black creature, and I would still play this thing. But they really amped it up, and I'm happy about it, because unless you've got some clunky 6 mana commander, maybe like a Tivit, where it's either in play and you win or it's dead immediately. Unless you got one of those, I think this is basically an auto include. There's almost nothing this card has or does that I'm not a fan of.
I would put this in every deck that isn't restricted by budget, or my commander isn't just a slap it on and you win. This is an A for us. This goes in basically every deck.
Yeah, easy A. The only point it loses out is, some commanders are 6+, and it's a little awkward because you really don't want to play 3 and a black for this. If you do, it's kind of a disaster because that's a terrible rate. But I do also appreciate that this card at least has a bailout where it's not like you can only cast it if you have your commander. I think that card would still be great, but I'm happy to have the bailout emergency break glass 4 mana thing.
Yeah, that is a bad rate, but if you need to exile something at instant speed and you don't have your commander because it just got swept up or something, I do like having that option. The next card is number 10, Deadly Dispute. 1 a black for an instant. As additional cost to cast it, you either sack an artifact or a creature, draw 2 cards, and create a treasure token. I like this because it has a little bit more flexibility than Village Rites, because if you have a spare food token lying around or something like that, you can sacrifice that and get the same type of effect and also make a treasure token, which can play very well into like the Mirkwood Bats, Academy Manufacturer, whatever strategies that you might have going on.
Ultimately, yeah, I think this is basically the same card as Village Rites, but it turns out adding a mana to the cost of the spell and then just refunding you a treasure is a little bit better. So I do like this card more than Village Rites. I still think it's only like a C. Pretty replaceable card. Some sacrifice decks want it. It does make a treasure, so obviously those decks care a lot more. And the ability to sacrifice an artifact is nice too.
Amber's here, and she and I both love the flexibility that Deadly Dispute gives over Village Rites. The next card is number 9. It's Victimize. 2 and a black for a sorcery. Choose 2 target creature cards in your graveyard. Sack a creature. If you do, return those chosen cards to the battlefield tapped. I like this card. I think that in decks with that want to recur things, or if you have like ETB things. I play this in my Yarok deck, and I really like it there.
I'm always surprised, and I always forget that Victimize is literally one of the most played black cards in the format. I really don't think it's like the best at what it does. I would prefer a reduction on the spell's cost to only bring back one thing. I want to pay 1 or 2 for that. There's also a little bit of a cost. You can't really play Victimize with one creature in play, because if your opponents kill it before Victimize resolves, you can't actually do anything with it. So you gotta make sure you have at least, an extra creature. So there's a little bit of setup. The creatures do come into play tapped, so they can't block. Ultimately, this is a stellar budget card. Pretty happy with this on a budget. I do prefer, I think, Dread Return a little bit more. Obviously, Animate Dead, some of the other enchantments that bring things back. There's a card coming up that I prefer over Victimize. It feels like there's nothing wrong with it. I think Victimize is a good card. It's another one I don't play, and I feel like it's like that C+ level. It's serviceable. Victimize will never be terrible for you. It will do a lot of great things, and there's also cards better than it, and it's a little bit replaceable, right?
Yeah, I think that maybe I'm a little bit softer on it than you are. I think it's very cool, and I also play decks with a lot of creatures, so because it says sacrifice a creature, not target creature, I'm never really that worried of like, oh, if you kill that one creature, I have another one laying around that, it's probably not the greatest to sacrifice, but it lets me still cast the spell even if it's not the creature I want back, and I do like a lot of ETBs and stuff, so I think that Victimize is fine.
You will get mana advantage. It is very good at getting mana advantage back, because we can get 2 6-drops for 3 mana. Let's say I can get 1 6-drop for 1 mana or 1 6-drop for 2 mana. That's a good rate. But if I'm really milling and I've really got the stuff going, maybe I Entombed, I can get 12 mana or more or whatever for 3 mana. And even if they are tapped, they've probably got some gnarly ETVs. So I can't hate on Victimize. It does its thing. I don't want to be too hard on you, buddy. You're a C+.
I mean, as you mentioned with Diabolic Intent, too, sometimes the cost of sacrificing a creature is also good if there are death triggers and that sort. So if you look at it in a positive light, in the decks that really can both cheat out big things with it and then also take advantage of dies triggers, this can be seen as a positive.
Just keep in mind, it is very risky to cast this card with only 1 creature on the battlefield, and you cannot cast it if you don't have 2 targets in the graveyard. So just keep that in mind, and it'll be pretty good for you. Next up, number 8, Blood Artist. 1 and a black for a 0/1. When it or another creature that anyone controls dies, target player loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. We're flipping around a bunch of words. This is the earliest version of this. Zulaport Cutthroat, he's a zoomer. He doesn't know anything. This hits any player, but you're only zapping 1 player to gain that life. And I think Blood Artist ultimately is better than Zulaport. A lot of times when you go critical mass or when you go infinite, it doesn't matter whether I say each opponent or just me. And Blood Artist has the unique bonus mode of stopping other players from going infinite and sacrificing a creature, because you will just zap them over and over.
He is very, very good at what he does, and I think he is just a critical piece in a lot of people's decks, whether that is like I play him in my Sorin deck, I play him in my Edgar deck. He has a lot of homes, I think.
You have him in Mahadi as well.
I have him in Mahadi as well. I feel like he just goes in a lot of decks, and I can see why he's number 8 on the most played black cards.
I think if I had to pick, this is the number 1 aristocrat card that drains people. Now, there's a lot of them that are close-ish. They're pretty close. So this isn't like Entomb, where it's miles and miles and miles ahead of every other card that can zap somebody when you kill a creature. But I do think it is the best by a little bit, so I like solid B for Blood Artist. B for Blood Artist.
I think B's good, too.
All right, number 7, what do we got?
We have Phyrexian Arena, a card we love to hate. It's 1 black for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. I think people have heard us say this a lot before, but we don't like waiting for our cards, especially when there are better cards on your, around the upkeep phase, like Black Market Connections. Phyrexian Arena, just having 1 card, 1 life, and just that slow trickle of cards makes it even worse, just because if you let it get 1 turn, that's 3 mana for 1 card and 1 life, and that's an awful rate.
Right, and you kind of have to wait. So what I really want to get on the card, I think once you hit 3 cards off of it, it's good, and you're happy to have played it. So now I have to play it, and I wait an entire turn, and I get 1, and then I wait an entire second turn, I get 2, and then I wait an entire second turn, where now it's been in play for let's see, I played it, that's 1, 2, 3, yeah. The 4th turn it will be in play, I get my 3rd card back. that's a long time. I think that's approaching like half the game. So if I have to wait about half the game or slightly less than half the game to get my value on a card when I could have just played 2 mana, draw 2, lose 2, it's a tough sell. I don't think Phyrexian Arena is an F. We haven't given an F to anything, and obviously the next cards are great, so we're not gonna give an F. I don't think any of the cards in this top 30 are unplayable by any means. I do think that Phyrexian Arena is a replaceable card. It is not a card I will ever leave in a deck that somebody submits to me, like on Patreon. We do deck audits. If I ever see Phyrexian Arena, I'm just going to cut it for a card I think is better.
I think it's so hard to leave it in decks, especially when we have better bursts of cards for 3 mana. For instance, if you have a excess of treasures, Painful Truths, because you can hit those 3 colors for treasures if you can do that, or if you're just playing other colors in your deck and your lands will tap for that. I think that Phyrexian Arena is just, again, like a precon card. It's like something you accidentally might leave in there, but it's also a card that I would touch way quicker than I would ever touch Read the Bones in terms of replacing and swapping out.
Right, because at least I get my cards back, and there's really no disaster scenario where it dies or something, and then I'm just screwed and I paid mana for nothing. Paying mana for nothing is way more backbreaking in Commander these days than it was like 10 years ago, where you could do that for multiple turns and it just doesn't matter.
I mean, not only is it backbreaking, it just feels really bad, because if you think about it, it's like, oh, I could have one Phyrexian Arena for 3 mana, or I have almost like half a big Atali. And just like when you think of like stuff like that, it's like how much mana you can spend to do nothing. It's like you can't really waste that at a certain point, because it just snowballs into having more and more disadvantage than the rest of your table in, whether it's 1, 2, or 3 turns.
All right, we're getting up there. These are like the most played black cards. Number 6, Reanimate. Black for a sorcery. Put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control when you lose life equal to its mana value. This is what I was talking about. Why do we think that it's called reanimating a creature? It's because this card is so broken, so great, so efficient, so ubiquitous that everything else is named after this card.
This card's sick. I love this card. I don't get to play this card as much as I'd like, but if I could, I would, because I'm usually in favor of synergy pieces, but if this is synergistic to your deck, it is so good. I love reanimating gigantic things from usually BZ's graveyard because it's his second hand, but it's really awesome because you can take things from other people's graveyards if your graveyard isn't full. Having this as like an opponent, mills a couple as their turn 1 or 2 play or something, and you're like, okay, turn 1 reanimate, I'll have a 10 drop really quickly.
Yeah, we didn't actually mention this when we talked about Animate Dead, so I'm glad I remembered it. Animate Dead has upsides, but it also has downsides. If you want the creature that you reanimated to stay in play, it is now vulnerable to creature removal and enchantment removal, because all they have to do is fire off a Nature's Claim on the Animate Dead and you lose your big thing. Reanimate is no strings attached. It's just in play as though you played it from your hand. There's no alternate way of killing this thing. If I throw down some big monster, you got to kill this big monster. You can't use any other removal on it. So I do like that. Reanimate also has some wombo combos. If you reanimate a Villas sees you lose the life, and you just draw 8 cards. So there's some absolutely nonsensical things you could do. I think Reanimate also pairs very well with Viscera Seer. We're talking now 2 mana to bring the creature back and sacrifice it. Some creatures like Protean Hulk are better off dead, and you can get that instant death by pairing this with other cheap cards to just win the game.
Overall, this is an A. It can go in any deck. It has the best rate for what it does, and it's just a really good card. It's iconic.
Yeah, like Animate Dead, it can pretty much go anywhere, but it will excel in the graveyard reanimator strategies. Next up, it's the other black board wipe, Toxic Deluge. 2 and a black sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you pay X life, and all creatures get -X until end of turn. Unlike almost every other board wipe, this does not scale in effectiveness to the mana you pay. It's just about how much life you pay up front, and it will always cost 3, which is very, very cheap for a board wipe.
We start with so much life, and there's so many things like Indestructible running around, or Ward and that sort of thing. So being able to trade that life to give -1/-1 counters and kill the big indestructible thing that is just haunting from the other side of the field is such a good feeling. And 3 mana, I can see why this is the best black board wipe, and I really love the fact that it's been getting reprints lately.
Yeah, it's so mana efficient. It's really not even expensive these days. It's like, I don't remember the exact price.
I think it's sub 10.
Yeah, I think it's sub 10, which is crazy for how good this card is. I'm very happy to pick it up for this price. Maybe it'll be in a future most worth buying. But yeah, solid, easy A for Toxic Deluge. It is top 5 board wipes in the format. Happy to play it. And the upsides on this card are even more than we're saying. Because if you have the biggest creature, you just pay life less than that creature's power, kill everything else, and now it's like pseudo one-sided where you keep an 8-drop and they all have nothing, and you can maybe attack with it, chip in, or get the triggers off of the things that it does. Toxic Deluge is quite the card, ladies and gentlemen.
This is a great card. The next one is a little bit stinkier, though. It's number 4, Feed the Swarm. One in a black for a sorcery, destroy target creature or enchantment an opponent controls. You lose life equal to that permanent's mana value. This is one of the only ways in mono black where you can destroy enchantments. And that is what makes it played a lot of places. It's also a card that people like to shove into precons, and I can see why it's high up here. Personally, I play it in decks that are only Rakdos or mono black, and I only have I think I only have Mahadi for that, so it's not really seen in a lot of my decks.
Yep, I don't play this card. I think that a lot of people want the security of being able to potentially answer anything in their decks. And they'll play a subpar card to do it because this is a very subpar rate at 2 mana and sorcery speed and life taxing you on this thing. So we're giving up a lot to be able to potentially answer the only permanent type that our colors can't, get a hold on. I personally don't think that that's really worth it on this rate of this card. I played Magic for many years, not being able to destroy enchantments in black and Rakdos decks, and the amount of times where I needed to destroy an enchantment and nobody else could or needed to destroy the enchantment and the enchantment was going to kill me, I don't even remember a single time. I think that's a very rare, like, triple Venn diagram to hit. But I totally understand also wanting to destroy this. I think this card ultimately ends up at a C-. It's not a card I'm really going to ever look for, especially now that we have Withering Torment, which I think is... It's 2 and a black instant, and you only ever lose 2 life. I do think that card's an upgrade, but I also think that card is not one I'm going to be going to. But if I had to pick one, I'd pick that one.
I like having my bases covered a little bit more than BZ, but I will probably consider taking this out. I might try Withering Torment. I might just try not having anything and just putting in another different piece of interaction into my decks for this. It's fine. It's just fine.
I want to maybe just stress that you don't need this card. I think it's fine to want it to cover your bases, but I think the situations where you're like, oh my god, if I only had Feed the Swarm, they're not as plentiful as they may seem like, especially since if you draw Feed the Swarm in your opening hand and there's a creature, you just kind of have to kill it. And then at that point, there could be an enchantment that pops up and wrecks your whole life. So Feed the Swarm is not like this answer where it's like, if you don't have, So Feed the Swarm is not this answer where if you build a deck that's mono black and you don't have Feed the Swarm, you say, I can't beat enchantments. But if you add Feed the Swarm, you suddenly say, now I can beat enchantments. There's still a lot of things that are going to take you out, and you have one copy of this card. C- though. I don't want to hate on it too much when it's, I think, serviceable.
I think that it's fine, as we mentioned earlier, but I might try taking it out and see where that kind of falls. The next card is number 3, Vampiric Tutor. Black for an instant. Search your library for a card, shuffle, put it on top. You lose 2 life. This is an unconditional tutor. This is great. The only problem is if your opponent can put that into the graveyard for you, and that happens so rarely. This can be tutored up. Your best card could be tutored up turn 1 for that insta win if you're trying to go very, very fast, or it's just good no matter where you are in the game.
And it doesn't matter what you're doing. Doesn't matter what you're playing. This is one of the best black cards, if not the best black card ever printed. Just note that it does put the card on top, so you don't have access to it literally immediately. You can easily fire it off end step or on your own upkeep to get the card very soon. Just know that it puts it on top. It's an A+. I don't really need to say much more. This is your best card at any moment. It's just a draw step away.
Tutors are great. Next is number 2, Dark Ritual. Black for an instant. You add 3 black. This is a very good rate for this mana. 1 mana for 3 mana at instant speed lets you hold up things like Oppo Agent if you want, or Orcish Bowmasters and a Vamp Tutor. Just overall, it's just I really do like playing this in the decks that need a lot of black pips.
So Dark Ritual is a card that I've seen have a glow up gradually, and I had to realize it recently over the last maybe like 10 years. When I started playing, I do not think that it was a good move to just Dark Ritual and fire off a 3-drop on turn 1 or a 4-drop on turn 2 in Commander. But have you seen some of the cards we're getting lately? The thing that makes Dark Ritual great is when you can cheat out a value engine that gets you cards. Because if you just Dark Ritual out some 4-drop, let's say even if you Dark Ritual out like Shieldred the Apocalypse, like, okay, cool. if Shield Red dies, you got 2 for 1, and that's the risk. But if you're Dark Ritualing out the One Ring or Bolas's Citadel or just some of these absolute units of cards, now it doesn't matter. I have an unstoppable must-answer threat in play. I've gotten my card back in some way, shape, or form, and it's not like I'm going to get 2 for 1. I'm not all in on this. So I think Dark Ritual has gotten much better over the years. If you've got, also I think 5-drop commanders, 4-drop commanders have gotten way better as we've just gotten millions and millions of them. Half of them have ward, half of them make your opponents do stuff or draw you a card when they enter, and these are great things to Dark Ritual out. So I used to be a Dark Ritual hater. Now I think it's got homes in like half of black decks. Like, it's a very playable card. Still probably a little overplayed if I had to guess, because it's the number 2 card here, but I think it's great.
I think that depending on what type of deck you have, if you're like 3, 4, and 5 colors, it might not have as much of a home because you might be hurting for other types of pips, or your decks might not lean heavily black. So this might be a little bit harder to either cast or use that mana. But if you can consistently use those black pips or just cheat out big things like, commanders overall, then this is an amazing card. Having that 2 turns early can really be the make or break for the game. It can really set the tone and make your opponents scramble to get removal for whatever giant thing you put out way too early.
I think I remember maybe putting this card somewhere around D+ or C- in the past. Let me know. We have a video on it from like 3 or 4 years ago that I'm sure I graded this card. Now I think I'm at like B+. I think it's very good in a lot of decks. Very easy to make up for the fact that you're 2 for 1ing yourself to get a card down early, and actually probably got a little bit of an uptick now that Mana Crypt is banned and Jewel Lotus.
Yeah, I think in the more competitive formats, if you're relying on fast mana to begin with, this is maybe one of those next steps along with like Mana Vault. Plus, just overall, if you're playing mono black, powering something gigantic out feels really good.
And if you want to see what an A+ card looks like, it's Moxfield.com. You probably forgot about it, but that's why we keep you on your toes, because you've just been bamboozled. They're the best deck building website on the planet, on the earth, in the multiverse, in the cosmos, the known universe.
You thought we were going to put the number 1 card here, but we actually put the number 1 website, Moxfield.com, where you can find all of our decks, and you can tell whether we're lying or telling the truth about whether we're playing Dark Ritual or not.
Yeah, see all the decks we play Dark Ritual in. Give us a follow. Why not? I think we're one of the most followed accounts on there. Keep the meme going. No one loves Moxfield more than us, and for good reason, because we love good deck building websites. Number 1, for real though, it's Demonic Tutor. If you're actually wondering what an A+ magic card is, 1 in a black sorcery, search your library for a card, put it into your hand, then shuffle. A+, no notes. It is your best card into your hand immediately. Honestly, this card might be better than Vampiric Tutor. I think it is close. I probably waffle on which one's better from day to day, but having the card in your hand, 2 mana is a tax that is worth paying. Once you get to 3 mana, it's a little bit stiff. It's harder. It's a little bit clunkier. You can't deploy the thing you tutor for as often, but just the way the math works out, the way the game works, 2 mana plus best card is busted.
There's a reason why it was the chase card in Strixhaven and the Strixhaven Japanese. It's such a good card. I mean, is there anything to say except for tutor good?
Yes, this is numbers 2 through 29 when you need them most, and it will never, ever, ever be dead. Just like this Nitpicking Nerds channel, it will never, ever die. And there's another video made just for you. It's right here.